You still remember the day you got it. Maybe it was a Saturday afternoon in 1991. Maybe you were 22. Maybe you walked in alone, or with a friend who dared you, or a girl you were trying to impress. You picked something off the wall or brought in a drawing. You sat in the chair. You didn't flinch. You walked out with something permanent on your body, and it felt exactly right. And now you're in your 50s. And sometimes in the bathroom mirror or at a pool, or when your kid notices it and asks what it means, you look at that tattoo and feel something complicated. Not regret exactly, not pride exactly, something in between that you've never quite put into words.
Here's what nobody ever tells the Gen X man with tattoos. And this is the part that changes how you understand yourself. That complicated feeling isn't about the tattoo. It never was. It's about something much deeper than ink on skin. And once you understand what it actually is, the feeling makes complete sense. Because that tattoo didn't just mark your body. It marked a moment. And the psychology of what that moment meant and what it means now is what this video is actually about.
Let's be honest about something first. You didn't get the tattoo because you were stupid or impulsive or trying to impress strangers. That's the lazy version of the story. You got it because at 22, or 25, or 28, you needed to do something permanent in a world that felt anything but. Think about what that era actually was for you. Your parents' marriage had probably already failed or was failing. The job you were told to get didn't exist anymore or paid less than promised. The institutions that were supposed to hold things together, the companies, the government, the churches, the schools, had been quietly breaking their side of the deal for years.
Everything felt temporary. Everything felt like it could be taken back. And so you did something that couldn't be taken back. You put something permanent on the one thing that was actually yours. Not your job, not your apartment, not your relationship, your body. The one piece of the world nobody could repossess. Meet Danny, 23, Detroit, 1993. The factory his father worked at for 28 years just announced it's moving to Mexico. His older brother got laid off 6 months ago. Danny is working a job he didn't plan on and living in a city that feels like it's slowly exhaling its last breath.
One Thursday night, he walks into a tattoo shop on Michigan Avenue and gets a tribal band around his left bicep. His mother thinks he's lost his mind. Here's what psychology says about that. Danny isn't being reckless. He's doing something deeply human. When external stability disappears, people anchor themselves through their bodies. The tattoo is Danny saying, "This part is mine. This part stays." Nobody is outsourcing this to Mexico. That's what was underneath it for a lot of you. Not rebellion for its own sake. Permanence as self-defense. In a generation that got handed instability as a birthright, the tattoo was one of the only things that stayed exactly where you put it.
But here's where it gets more interesting. Because what you chose to make permanent, the image, the symbol, the words, that wasn't random either. And what it says about who you were at that age is something most men never sit with long enough to understand.
A tribal band, a skull, a band logo, a Celtic knot, a name, a dragon, an eagle, a piece of scripture, a date. Whatever it was, you chose it for a reason. And even if you'd struggle to articulate that reason now, your 22-year-old self knew exactly what he was doing. Psychologists call this identity anchoring. When a person's sense of self is still forming, still being tested by the world, they reach for external symbols to stabilize it, to make something about themselves visible and fixed, to say, "This is who I am. This is what I stand for. This is where I belong." For Gen X men specifically, this was complicated by something most of you felt but rarely said out loud. You weren't sure you were allowed to have an identity. You were the Latchkey Generation, the one told to figure it out, the one whose emotional life was largely unsupervised. Nobody sat you down and asked who you were becoming. You just became someone and hoped it was right.
The tattoo was, for a lot of you, the first time you made a public statement about yourself. The first time you said, "Here is something about me that isn't up for debate.
A study published in Body Image found that people who get tattoos during late adolescence and early adulthood report a significant increase in self-esteem and body satisfaction immediately following the tattoo. The physical permanence creates a psychological anchor, a point of stable identity in a period of high uncertainty. For men especially, the effect was tied to a sense of ownership over their own narrative.
You weren't just decorating yourself, you were authoring yourself. For a generation that was handed very few tools for self-expression and told to get on with it, that was significant. But here's the part nobody prepares you for. The man who needed that anchor at 22, he grew, he changed. He became someone the tattoo didn't quite account for. And now the permanent thing and the changed man have to live in the same body. That's where the complicated feeling comes from.
Let's talk about what happens when you look at it now. Maybe it's faded. Maybe the lines have softened in ways that make the original design harder to read. Maybe it used to mean something specific, and now it just means I was young once, and I wanted to feel like I had a say in something. And that feeling, the complicated one, has a name in psychology. It's called identity discontinuity. It's what happens when the person you are now looks back at a decision made by a version of you that no longer exists. It's not quite regret. Regret means you wish you hadn't done it. This is different. This is more like running into an old photograph of yourself and not fully recognizing the person in it, not disowning them, just noticing how far the road has gone since that moment.
Meet Paul, 54, Ohio, today. He's got a full sleeve on his right arm. Got it done in pieces between 1990 and 1998. Every piece meant something at the time. Now, he's a project manager with 3 kids and a mortgage, and he wears long sleeves to certain meetings. Not because he's ashamed, but because he's tired of explaining something he can't fully explain anymore. His youngest daughter, who is 17, thinks the sleeve is the coolest thing about him. His son, who is 23, wants one just like it. Paul looks at it some mornings and feels something he can't name. Not regret, something older than regret. Like looking at a journal entry from a year you survived, but wouldn't want to repeat.
Here's what psychology says about that. Paul isn't confused about his identity. He has more of it now than he did at 25. What he's feeling is the weight of time compressed into a piece of skin. The tattoo didn't age the way he did, and that gap between who he was and who he became is actually evidence of growth, not failure, growth. That's the thing about permanent decisions. They don't update themselves. You do. And every time you look at the tattoo, you're seeing the distance between 2 versions of yourself, the one who needed to make a mark and the one who turned out to be the mark. But here's what most men miss entirely, and this is the part that matters most. That distance isn't something to feel bad about. It's something to understand, because what it's telling you about who you actually are, that's worth hearing. Here is what the research keeps finding about men who got tattoos young and carried them into middle age. They aren't the ones who stopped growing. They're actually more likely to have a richer interior life than men who never took the risk in the first place. A comprehensive review published in Body Image analyzed multiple studies on tattooed individuals across age groups. One of the consistent findings was that people who chose permanent body modification showed higher levels of identity exploration, meaning they were more likely to have genuinely wrestled with who they were, rather than defaulting to whoever the world expected them to be. The discomfort that sometimes follows isn't a sign of a bad decision. It's a sign of a person who kept evolving past the decision. Think about what it actually takes to carry a tattoo through a life like yours. You wore it through every job interview where you rolled your sleeve down, through every family event where someone made a comment, through the decade where it was cool again, and the decade where it wasn't, and the decade where it was cool again for entirely different reasons. You carried a piece of your younger self on your skin every single day without being able to put it in a drawer, without being able to log out of it, without being able to pretend that version of you didn't exist. That takes something. That's not weakness. That is a man who has lived with his own history instead of hiding it. A man who made a real choice at a real age and stood behind it, even when it was inconvenient. The unmarked man kept his options open. You committed. Those are 2 different kinds of courage, and neither one is better. But yours left evidence. And here's the final part. The one that brings all of this together. Because the question isn't really about the tattoo at all. The question is about what you do with the man in the mirror now. The one carrying 30 years of life on his skin and wondering what it all added up to.
Here is the honest truth about the Gen X man with tattoos at 55. He is not a cautionary tale. He is not someone who needs to explain himself. He is not someone who made a mistake that needs correcting. He is a man with visible history, and visible history is rare. Most men your age have put everything in storage. The music they loved, the things they believed, the parts of themselves that were raw and certain and unpolished. They packed it all away somewhere respectable and stopped talking about it. You can't do that. The tattoo won't let you. Every time you look in the mirror, you were looking at the 22-year-old who needed to plant a flag. And that's not a burden. That's a conversation. A conversation between who you were and who you became. Your son's friend, maybe 25 years old, spots the tattoo at a backyard cookout. He asks about it. You give the short version. He nods and says, "That's actually sick. What does it mean?" And for a second, you're back in 1993. You're back in the chair. You're back in the version of yourself that had no idea what was coming. The marriages, the jobs, the losses, the things that turned out better than expected, and the ones that didn't. Here's what psychology says about that moment. That's not nostalgia. That's integration. That's a man who has lived enough to hold two versions of himself at the same time. The young one who marked himself, and the older one who made something of the man underneath the mark. Most people never get there. You're already there. The complicated feeling you get when you look at it, that's not confusion about who you are. It's evidence of how much ground you've covered. You were 22 and you needed something to hold on to. You're 55 and you are something to hold on to. Those aren't contradictions. That's just what a life looks like when you actually live it. The tattoo didn't define you. But the man who got it and then kept growing anyway, that man defined himself. And that's the whole story. If this video said something you've been carrying around without a name for it, I'm glad it landed. That feeling you get when you look at that tattoo, the complicated one, now you know what it is. It's not regret. It's not pride. It's the distance between two real versions of a real man. And that distance is something to respect, not fix. Subscribe if this is the kind of conversation you want more of. Every video on this channel is built for exactly this, the psychology of what it actually means to be a man at this stage of life. No noise, no performance, just honest. And if you haven't watched the previous video yet, go back and watch it now. It's about the Gen X metalhead and what the science actually found when researchers tracked down 1980s metal fans 30 years later. It connects directly to everything we talked about today. Same generation, same formation, different angle. Thank you for being here. The kid who sat in that chair at 22 didn't know what he was starting. The man watching this video does.